Hey guys, today what we're going to work on is a little bit of wrist stability. So if you've been having problems with your hands and wrists while you're working at the computer or doing your hands work at home or whatnot, or even think about if you're having issues doing a plank or a push-up with your wrists, then that's what we're going to work on today. There's a couple things that you can do without always having the assistance of a therapist or doctor show you to test if you have a problem here. A lot of times, like for a plank or push-up, we need to have good flexibility in our wrist. So we need to be able to have full extension through the motion there without any strain through it. So a nice test to do to see if you have good wrist mobility is go through a little prayer stretch. So if you want to take your hands together like Brandon's doing, and then extend his elbows, and you see how he's putting pressure through his wrist there. You want to make sure that everything, it's like a T almost, where it's perpendicular. And there's not much of a gap right there. So Brandon has actually good flexibility, but if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to go as far, or his hands would kind of open up at that part. And that's something he would need to stretch, whether it be his wrist or some of his forearm muscles there. You also can see it the other way with a reverse prayer stretch and switch it around and see it as just generally good mobility within his wrist, which he does. And again, just needs to be in that T position, and just make sure you can hold that for a few seconds there without any strain or struggle going through that motion there. Again, if he couldn't do it, there'd be a little bit of a gap, or his hands would come up a little bit and be just uncomfortable to hold that position there. So a couple things you can do to work on those areas there. You can actually just hold these positions to work through a stretch. You might have to loosen up the wrist joint in general, the carpal bones that sit, if you want to relax, Brandon, within your wrist here. There's 8 little bones that sit right in this area here, and sometimes they can feel a little stiff if you haven't been moving them around. So one good thing you can do is a distraction before you stretch. So all you're doing here is taking one hand out. If you stretch out the right hand like Brandon's going to do it, and then he's just cupping the outside of his end of his palm there, and then he's going to pull away, and he should see, if I move his rubber bands here, a little bit of pull or separation in that area here. That way it helps open or gap some of that area to give you more space to stretch out your wrists, whether it been into that flexion position or extension position that we were doing earlier there. Again, I would try about 10 little mobs or just pulls as you do it, anywhere from like 5 or 10 seconds as you hold it there. And then once you feel comfortable, you feel a little bit of a space happening there, then you can pull and then stretch through, whether you want to stretch down into flexion position to get a little extra space to allow you to stretch some of those muscles without that joint being too tight. Again, holding that stretch for about 20 seconds. Or if you want to stretch the other way into extension, again, just pulling up and pulling your wrist up. Just pull a little bit and then pull a little bit and push up on the palm side of your hand, again, for about 20 to 30 seconds of a hold. 3 to 5 stretches should make you feel pretty good about keeping your wrists loose, and then you can just relax and just kind of roll your hands out after all the stretches there. So this, besides mobility in your wrist to support yourself, is that you'll need strength and stability to do your work with your hands, whether it be weightlifting or, again, just working in the office here. So again, one good test to do is just test your grip strength. See how strong your hand is in total. And again, a good way to do it without having to see a physical therapist or whatnot is just grabbing a small weight and seeing how long you can hold it. And so what you're going to do, I would say, grab anywhere from a 2 to 5 pound weight. And how you're going to hold it like Brandon's doing here is he's going to hold it at the end here, and he's going to try to just grip it with his fingertips. Get his flexors to go, of course, but then he needs to straighten out his fingers and his wrist and keep that all in a straight line. The other part of it, he just needs to keep his arm close to his body here, so he doesn't get to use his shoulder per se to hold the weight up. He's going to try to use his forearm muscles that lead into his extensors and flexors, of course, in his hands, and he needs to be able to hold that for about a minute, and that will give you a good indication of how strong your hand is. The thing is, if you can't hold this weight up without too much struggle, and you start noticing your wrist giving way, well, that just means you need to work on some of that strength, especially in those wrist extensors here. That, or if you find your fingers getting tired from gripping this weight for roughly a minute. Again, strength on the opposite side, your flexors there need to be worked on too. And in the next couple exercises, we're going to show you how to do that. Okay guys, we're going to work on wrist extension strength and how we're going to do it. Still, we're going to hold the weight at the end of the dumbbell here. And what you can do, if we're going to hold it in a flex position here, so we're going to just let our wrist drop here. And our goal is to flip the weight up to where this end piece goes from the ground and starts pointing up towards the ceiling. We're going to extend it as far as we can. And just working on those extensors. Again, that grip strength still has to work, so you'll get a little bit of flexors too. And we're going to do about, if you do it in a controlled manner, all I have to do is about 2 sets of 10 going through it. And as long as you go real slow, find the control to work those muscles in the forearms, help build that stability to hold your hands up a lot longer. If you have a hard time holding with your fingertips at the end of the weight, what you can do is cup it like a doorknob and then go through the same motion there. Try to keep your wrist straight as you're going through it. A lot of times we'll have a habit of rolling our hand over, and we want to keep that wrist relatively flat so knuckles are pointed up towards the ceiling as we're going through that motion there. Okay, next exercise we call it a doorknob. So what you're going to do is really rotate the dumbbell like a doorknob here. And how you're going to hold it here again, is you're just going to hold it at the end of the dumbbell. And what you're going to do is try to rotate your forearm and bring your palms up towards the ceiling while you hold that weight out towards a wall in front of you here. You go just nice and slow and controlled. Again, 10 to 20 reps of this one in a controlled manner. It's going to be pretty tough. So just take your time with this one. You find this again more challenging because your fingers can't hold the weight in that position here. You can hold it again, just more of the knob and go through the motion here. And you can kind of play with the angle or what fingers you put the weight in. If you find that it might be more challenging between your index or middle finger, or even if you put it between your ring finger and your pinky finger. Good. For this exercise, what we're going to work on is just a closed chain exercise on your wrists. Make sure you can support yourself, of course, after doing all the other exercises. So what we'll have Brandon do over here is actually get up to quadruped head, which really means just be on all fours. And he's going to put a little stress in his wrist here. So just on his knees, having his hands right beneath his shoulders here, and see if you can tolerate the pressure there. If he couldn't tolerate the pressure in this position here, he just rock his hips back and then work forward on it and try to work on stability to gain a little bit more support and control to make sure he can support his weight onto other exercises that he wants to do. And again, I'd rock back and forth about 10 to 20 times just to try to get everything to loosen up and feel comfortable about supporting your weight in this position here. If this position's okay, you can move on to the next progression, which would be a plank position here. So Brandon moves over into a plank position where he actually lifts his knees off the ground, is more on his toes, and again puts more weight into his wrists to make sure everything feels okay so he can get on to doing other plank core exercises or even doing push-up type activities here. But if it feels okay from here, a good plank or core exercise to do, he can rock his feet back and forth, again kind of shifting his weight over his hands and wrists and then back off, and see how that feels overall. And if he has strain in his wrist, of course he just needs to back off and maybe go back to the quadruped head position or work on a little bit more flexibility on the other exercises to work on. But otherwise, I would try that again about 10 to 20 times to make sure everything's good. And if everything's pretty good, then you can move on to other exercises that you want to work on.